Hi, in this video I want to discuss the goods and bads and the pain and what we may perceive to be a good and how in and of itself that has value. So in many circumstances this is one of the things that many people have to overcome the hump of when it comes to philosophical talk about suffering, the ones that at least I've noticed in some of the videos I've watched. And it seems to be the biggest disagreement, at least when it comes to misconstruing a topic, at least to intentionally misunderstand what someone's saying. Yes, in and of itself, we understand means the suffering in and of itself is bad. The stub toe was for no good reason, but we can understand that the stub toe can have led to something else. But the thing I want to say is the stub toe was just another piece of unnecessary information that was in something. It was a piece, it was in the reel of existence. It was going to happen. It was part of the cause and effect interaction, but it was just part of the interaction. So the stub toe wasn't really the thing that caused the good that ends up happening as a side effect of you getting a stub toe. The stub toe in and of itself was still bad, and it was still bad because even if it did create something good in the end, the stub toe, brought a light bulb in your head and had you remember a decent and reasonable idea to make, say, a video on, and all of a sudden that was a good thing. But then again, that good thing could have led to a bad thing. In the end, it's just the suffering that matters, because in the end, it's only going to lead to more suffering in the end, regardless. It's just going to lead to a redundant process of redoing the same thing, generally speaking, over and over again, of living and going through the deprivation. I'd say ultimately getting a stub toe leading to your death would be the ultimate stub toe that means a thumbs up in the end, because the stub toe is only going to accomplish what? A good idea to lead to another, downfall to lead to another good idea. Doesn't really mean anything in the end. But the point I want to make is, even say if, hypothetically speaking, the stub toe were the thing to directly have a cause on something good in the end, so your stub toe led to a good idea, doesn't mean the stub toe was in and of itself good. The stub toe that you received, or whatever example, any number of things, any number of suffering, using a stub toe as a common example we can all understand, that we can all at least relate to, um, was still bad in and of itself. It was still pain, even if it led to something good, even if you got some excitement out of it. You're only getting the excitement and the satisfaction based on the negative that you were experiencing to begin with. Not only are you getting out of the negative, then, oh, I feel good now. Okay, I'm excited. You're excited about a negative, the fact that you're in a negative and that you're going to feel so good when you're in a positive. It doesn't mean that the negative that's happening right now isn't a negative and that you're not suffering from it or you're not feeling any pain. It's still a pain in and of itself. And you're going to experience some kind of positive in the end. Okay, this stub toe made you appreciate something more, and that led to some kind of good idea or good charitable action on your part. It doesn't mean the fact that you experienced a stub toe wasn't a stub toe, and it still was a negative experience in and of itself, regardless of the effects that it had. That's the effects. We're talking about the stub toe, the experience that you had that moment. The stub toe, the cancer, the broken leg, broken arm, broken bone, the any number of things you can think of. Those things are all in and of themselves bad, and that's where we have to isolate these things. In and of themselves, the stub toe is bad. It's unnecessary suffering. And even if it did have a good effect, the good effect is redundant and pointless, really, if I want to describe it, as inaccurately as possible. But yes, the stub toe leads to you doing that, but it only leaves you more room to suffer in the end more. It was only additional suffering when every interaction led up to that stub toe, and every interaction is going to lead to that stub toe. It's only more likely going to lead more room for future suffering. You can have learned your lesson. But that doesn't mean it's going to change the fact that the stub toe didn't have to exist. I think that's what I want to say. So yes, the stub toe didn't have to exist, and since the stub toe necessarily isn't the thing that's necessarily responsible, because it's based on all these previous events, it was inevitable. That doesn't mean that it had to happen. It couldn't have happened any other way. It was going to happen a certain way, and we don't know until it happened. But it could have happened some other way, and we could have gone without the pain and still come up with the idea, theoretically speaking. But obviously it didn't happen that way, and we don't know what's going to happen until it's already happened. So it's one of those things where you just have to chop it up to being something in the past, and we have to take the most out of the circumstance. And that's, I guess, what it really boils down to, is making the most of the circumstance as opposed to anything else. So, yes, sort of like the good, you experience something good. Like the idea you mentioned, in and of itself, it's a good idea. But the good is based on a negative that you experienced before the good. Like I mentioned before, all your future is predicated on the stub toe, and all the past is predicated on the stub toe, because it's another interaction, like I mentioned. These interactions that you have are all based on previous interactions, and they're going to lead to more interactions, more things affecting each other, and that's going to lead to more and more interaction. So once everything is just boiled down to a simple interaction, you realize the stub toe you had, since it's just another interaction based on previous interactions, was completely unnecessary. Therefore, the idea you had, even though it was, based on previous interactions that involved a stub toe, and didn't need to involve a stub toe, it could have been something else that made you lead to it that was less painful. In many cases, it could have come to you sooner. It doesn't mean that it was needed. It just happened to happen, and that's the way things happen to have occurred, and that's the way things are going to move on from there. And the only thing you can do at this point is learn from your lesson. But why learn a lesson when the lesson didn't have to be learned to begin with? Why have the character, of having all these negative experiences, based on all these negative experiences, when you didn't have to have any of these negative experiences to begin with? That's the ultimate question. But once you're living, you're going to be forced into these experiences. You're going to be forced to be given a character. You're going to be forced to lose your innocence. And in that case, you're just going to have to say, that's life. Unfortunately, and the only thing we could do is try to make this game as fair as possible, if not completely mitigate the game entirely by, say, eradicating it. And that's the only way you can prevent someone, say, from building character and using that excuse as some kind of reasonable excuse for life going on. Life's still going on there because all we're doing is building character, right? It's still going on, but we're building character. Therefore, it's obviously has some meaning, but all we're doing is building character when we didn't have to build character to begin with. It's all a very pointless process in the end. So, anything else I need to mention on this subject? So the good and the bad in and of themselves. I mean, the stub toe, like I mentioned, is bad in and of itself, regardless of the fact that you got something good out of it. But then again, like I mentioned, it's not really like you're getting it out of the stub toe. It just happened you've gotten it after the stub toe on that circumstance of how things actually happen to have occurred. That's the way you can have projected something happening differently. But that's the only place where a possible different future comes from, is from our projection, our expectation, possibility, probabilities, this probability math going on in our head, based on what we want, what we need, what we expect, our hopes, our anticipation. All these things are the only thing giving us a false expectation of hope, or a false expectation of some kind of alternate future. In reality, that's all in here. And it's all in here. And the thoughts that we're projecting as the future, or anticipation, are all just actions that are occurring now as the inevitable actions that were going to occur now anyway. And, there's no way to avoid it. That's just part of the process of existing. In many cases, I don't like boiling it down to that, but that's the thing we have to realize. It's just making it the most efficient, doing it as efficiently as we can reasonably understand to do it efficiently as possible, based on our knowledge, and use it as best as we can. Sort of like predicting weather patterns. Just because you're predicting it beforehand and thinking about it, you can do it and you can still predict the right thing. It's just about knowing the proper method of which to do so. And that's exactly what you need to do. My throat, oh. Wow, it really takes a toll on your throat. So yes, good, bad in and of itself. Obviously, the good in and of itself is just avoiding a bad in every circumstance. Even the tension of building up, like I mentioned, an orgasm is based on the tension you build. If you realize the tension, it's biting away at you. It's a good tension, but it's also a tension that you build up too long. It becomes irritating. It becomes obnoxious. You realize that it's good, but it's also really obnoxious. Sort of like a tickle. It can be very good and very pleasing and relaxing, but it's very obnoxious feeling. So it's one of those things where it's a vague one, but it's still a deprivation. I need to get rid of this. It's really getting to me. I'm not satisfying it. And it's the desire to satisfy it and not satisfying it yet that makes even something like achieving an orgasm a deprivation. Achieving a sexual gratification, the most extreme thing you could think of, a deprivation. Even if you didn't think you needed it, all of a sudden you say, oh, I didn't know I liked roller coaster rides. Doesn't mean that you weren't still satisfying some empty hole of boredom or some kind of thing like that to fill in the gap. There was still some kind of gap there that you were trying to fill, regardless of whatever you were thinking. It's one of those, you're still filling a gap You just didn't know what the solution was until all of a sudden you realized you like riding roller coasters. So, yeah, I think that's all I need to say. So yeah, like I want to mention that one thing one more time is, if everything is a simple interaction, the stub toe wasn't necessary in that interaction. But it just happened to be the thing that existed. All pain is unnecessary pain. It's just some pain is needed to get to the positive things, or the value exchanges that we need to make sometimes to make up. You go through a broken back to prevent 100 other broken backs. The broken back that you're still experiencing is an unnecessary pain, but it's preventing more unnecessary pain in the end. But that's, like I said, it's hard to understand those value equations when you can never really predict them, unless a person says, I'm going to press this button if you don't do this for me. Obviously, you don't have to do it precisely, exactly the way, necessarily the way they want it, but you're still going to have to make a value exchange. And you almost have an obligation when you know the other imperfect being, or the other being, making a, say, a threatening value judgment where you have to make a choice. You're going to have to make a choice to do this or do that. Life doesn't present it as thoroughly or as understandably or as predictably, but say if a person says, I'm going to press this button and I'm going to cause all sorts of fiery death, or you jump into the flames yourself and you'll save all these people's lives. You have an obligation to do it yourself and make sure that you, and almost in a way you could be giving up greater value that you may have had in the future for doing this simpler, smaller value. You can have been accomplishing more. So it's about making those value judgments, and in the end, you never really know the value judgments you're making. You just understand the implications. This is a bad thing, but that doesn't always mean I'm going to make the right choices or the right thing is going to happen. That's why the bad things are happening anyways, because the wrong things are happening to cause those bad things to happen. Just because a value judgment is here and there's going to be more people choosing the bad thing, or that something bad is going to happen, doesn't mean I'm going to make the right choice and prevent those bads. It just means a bad's happening, and the bad in and of itself is bad regardless of the choice I'm making. So regardless of the choice I'm making, doesn't mean it's not objectively bad. It just means you made a subjective decision to avoid the objective truth of bad occurring. And it's still occurring regardless of what you want to say or what you want to believe or not. So it's something that exists in reality. So yeah, like I mentioned, it's all predicated on that stub toe, right? But it didn't need to exist anyway, especially when everything is just a simple interaction. When everything is just a simple interaction, it's all predicated on previous events. You can say, well, it's just as much predicated on this happening, me getting a cupcake, as opposed to me stubbing my toe. I could have avoided the stub toe and gotten it anyway. I could have, I could have gotten it when I got the stub toe, but now the stub toe delayed it 5 seconds. You can just think of it that way. It doesn't always mean it's useful, but it does mean sometimes it makes you think of it that way when you really think, okay, well, obviously the stub toe is what caused it, but you don't really know, because since the stub toe is just another interaction, it could have been just as easily something else to cause it, or you could have replaced the stub toe with something else, or it could have been while you had the stub toe that the thing that you feel like you got out of the stub toe could have occurred itself. So it's all just a silly little mind game that we play on ourselves to rationalize our bad decisions and the bad things that happen to us. It's hard to accept a bad thing that happened to us and feel like we're not going to get anything really good out of it. We want to feel like we accomplished so much because we're paraplegic now, or you're quadriplegic. All of a sudden, you go on motivational tours. You didn't need to be paraplegic. You did, and that's what happens. Make the most of it. But you didn't have to, and the circumstance says you don't really necessarily have to. It just happens to be that way. And you can have accomplished more elsewhere, as opposed to, say, giving paraplegic talks. You can have accomplished much more, say, doing whatever you weren't accomplished before than this. So you never really know. But it's understanding that just because you never really know the outcome doesn't mean that the suffering you're experiencing in and of itself is not bad. And every good you experience doesn't mean it's not a good, but compared to a bad you experienced before. And that's the zero sum I'm talking about and everyone else is talking about as well. So I think I may have mentioned something earlier in the video that I didn't complete the idea of, but it has to do with based on the stub toe and going into the future, and it's all based on that stuff. It's predicated on the future, the good and the bad, and all that stuff again. But regardless, I don't want to make this video too much longer, so if I have anything else to mention on the subject, if I remember the idea, I thought I may have forgot, I may have finished the idea. I don't know. We'll figure it out. But I think, generally speaking, you followed me. Always feel like I'm a little less more genius when I missed the idea I feel like I missed, even though I may have not missed it. But anyway, any more on this subject, I'll mention it next time. So, thank you, and until then.